History is filled with stories of war, but some accounts go far beyond anything we consider possible. Buried deep within ancient records, there are descriptions of weapons, machines, and experiments that feel strangely out of place, technologies that seem too advanced for their time, and events so powerful they were either forgotten or deliberately erased. Were these just myths exaggerated through generations? Or could they be fragments of something real, something humanity was never meant to fully understand? Because the deeper you look, the more unsettling the pattern becomes. Civilizations across the world describing things that sound eerily similar, as if they had witnessed forces far beyond their era. And it all begins with one of the most disturbing accounts ever written. Top 1. The Montauk Project. We begin our journey in the summer of 1983, deep within the dense pine forests of Long Island, New York. There, an unassuming radar facility known as Camp Hero suddenly fell off the military's radar. This was not meant in a metaphorical sense. It literally vanished from scheduled maintenance logs, personnel rosters, and satellite surveillance for exactly 3 days. A civilian contractor assigned to inspect malfunctioning communication equipment nearby reported that his instruments glitched violently as he approached the compound. Then, without warning, his equipment shut down completely. He claimed he saw a shimmering outline like heat rising off pavement, hovering above the facility's antennas. Within hours, the area was closed off. He was detained, questioned, and later dismissed without explanation. No one would speak of Camp Hero again. Something had happened, something that shouldn't have. According to a series of leaked interviews and documents that surfaced decades later, Camp Hero was the epicenter of what has become known as the Montauk Project, an alleged black budget experiment run jointly by undisclosed branches of the U.S. military and private defense contractors. The project's alleged focus included mind control, psychological warfare, and more disturbingly, temporal displacement. Central to this narrative was a device known only as the Montauk chair, a highly specialized electromagnetic seat said to amplify the human brain's latent psychic abilities. Subjects placed in the chair were reportedly able to access distant locations through thought alone, create physical objects from pure imagination, and in some cases, tear open time loops. One of the earliest and most vocal whistleblowers was Preston Nichols, a man who claimed to have recovered repressed memories of working at Montauk as a technical engineer. He described a cold clinical atmosphere inside the underground labs, where gifted children were used for psychotronic testing. The project allegedly attempted to weaponize telepathy and remote viewing. Nichols detailed complex transmitter systems that pulsed ultra-low frequency signals directly into test subjects' brains. Some reports claim that those signals could induce hallucinations, memory erasure, or even forced obedience. But the most unsettling detail of all was a claim that in August 1983, the Montauk chair inadvertently opened a portal in time, a rift so unstable that the facility had to be immediately shut down and sealed. Officially, none of this is confirmed. The U.S. government denies that anything called the Montauk Project ever existed. When requested under the Freedom of Information Act, no documents have been found, or at least none released. Camp Hero itself has since been converted into a public state park, though many areas remain fenced off without signage. Curiously, electromagnetic disturbances are still regularly reported near the perimeter. Visitors often complain of vertigo, nausea, and inexplicable time loss. Some bring compasses that spin in circles. As for Nichols, he continued to publish detailed accounts until his death in 2018, though many dismissed him as a crank. Yet other whistleblowers, including former employees of Brookhaven National Laboratory nearby, quietly echoed fragments of his story. They spoke of non-linear time experiments and government efforts to erase memories of those involved. Still, with no hard proof, the Montauk Project remains a cold case shrouded in speculation and silence. But one fact endures. Something highly classified occurred at Camp Hero. If even a fraction of the Montauk testimonies are true, then our understanding of physics, time, and human consciousness may be artificially limited, not by nature, but by design. Top 2. The Stargate Program. Moving from the forests of New York to the research labs of California, we find the Stargate Program. In 1975, deep within the walls of the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California, A man named Ingo Swann sat silently in a windowless room. Before him lay nothing but a blank sheet of paper and a set of coordinates. Without ever leaving his chair, Swann began to draw. Hours later, the sketch he completed, a series of domes, towers, and trenches, matched exactly the layout of a classified Soviet missile site. The intelligence community was stunned. Swann was not a spy, he was a psychic. And this was only the beginning of what would become known as the Stargate program. Officially initiated by the Defense Intelligence Agency and funded by the CIA, the Stargate program was a top-secret effort to explore psychic phenomena for use in military and intelligence operations. Its primary focus was a technique called remote viewing, the ability to perceive information about a distant or unseen target using only the mind. Over the next 2 decades, from 1978 until its official closure in 1995, the U.S. government poured millions of dollars into the program. The results, as revealed through declassified FOIA documents, were equal parts fascinating and disturbing. The sessions were meticulously structured. Viewers were given coordinates or code numbers linked to unknown targets. Without any additional context, they were asked to describe what they saw. In case after case, trained remote viewers produced sketches and verbal descriptions that often correlated with satellite imagery or field reports. They claimed to see inside Soviet submarines, underground bunkers, and even described the movement of hostages in real time. Some even claimed to access targets across vast distances, and in one case, even across time. Ingo Swann, considered the father of remote viewing, pushed the boundaries further. In a particularly controversial session, he claimed to describe the rings of Jupiter before they were confirmed by NASA's Pioneer 10 probe. Others, like Pat Price and Joseph McMoneagle, both trained under military supervision, produced accurate information on secret facilities and operations that were later verified through conventional intelligence channels. These were not magicians or mystics. They were former Army officers, engineers, and analysts operating under strict scientific protocols. Despite its success stories, the program was plagued by skepticism from the beginning. Critics labeled it pseudoscience. Internal documents show repeated tensions between scientists, military handlers, and political overseers. And yet the program endured for nearly 20 years, moving between agencies, changing code names from Grill Flame to Center Lane to Sunstreak before finally being unified under the name Stargate. In 1995, the CIA publicly terminated the project, releasing a statement that remote viewing had produced no actionable intelligence. However, the final review was conducted by a private contractor, SAIC, under mysterious circumstances, and many within the intelligence community believed the closure was a political decision, not a scientific one. Most notably, several of the program's top psychics claimed they were still being quietly contracted for off-the-books assignments. Today, the Stargate files sit in archives, redacted and fragmented, with entire sections missing or blacked out. Independent researchers and journalists who have dug deeper claim the program was far more successful and far more expansive than officially admitted. Rumors persist of viewers tasked with probing extraterrestrial installations, interdimensional entities, and alternate timelines. But those files, if they exist, remain buried beyond public reach. The Stargate program forces us to confront a chilling question. If the human mind can access information beyond space and time, who gets to control it? And more importantly, how do we know they ever stopped? Top 3, Project HARP. Next, we look toward the frozen north where atmospheric research took a suspicious turn. In 1993, a sprawling array of antennas rose from the snowy wilderness near Gakona, Alaska. It was the birth of the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HARP, officially funded by the U.S. Air Force, the Navy, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. HARP was presented as a scientific installation dedicated to studying the ionosphere, the uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere. But as the first test signals pulsed through the sky, a wave of suspicion followed. The frequencies were too powerful, the patterns too precise, and the silence from officials too deliberate. Something else was happening above Alaska, and the world was not supposed to know. HARP's core was the ionospheric research instrument, 180 antennas linked to high-frequency transmitters capable of sending 3.6 megawatts into the atmosphere. This array, covering 33 acres, could focus energy on a single point in the ionosphere and excite it, temporarily changing its structure. According to public papers, this allowed scientists to simulate and study phenomena like auroras and radio wave propagation. But others began to notice anomalies. Weather patterns shifted unexpectedly during test windows. GPS systems briefly malfunctioned, and reports began surfacing of strange humming noises and atmospheric distortions near the facility. Theories exploded in the vacuum of transparency. Some scientists warned that HAARP could manipulate the weather, triggering storms, droughts, or even earthquakes by altering jet streams and tectonic resonances. Others claimed it could interfere with human brainwaves using extremely low-frequency ELF pulses to induce confusion, sleep disturbances, or agitation on a massive scale. These warnings were often dismissed as conspiracy, yet curiously, some of the patents associated with HAARP technology reference modifying atmospheric conditions and controlling the ionospheric mirror. One particularly alarming patent filed by a physicist working with ARCO, HAARP's original contractor, proposed a method for altering the climate via high-frequency radiation. Despite growing concerns, HAARP remained operational but highly restricted. Civilian scientists were occasionally invited to tour the facility, but access was tightly controlled. When independent researchers attempted to analyze the emissions, they encountered signal jamming or ambiguous results. In 2014, the military abruptly handed control of the facility to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. The reason? They claimed the program had achieved its research goals. No further explanation was given. Even then, many of the original systems remain classified. What makes HAARP be especially chilling is not just what it does, but what it represents. The ability to influence planetary systems from a remote location is a form of power once confined to mythology or science fiction. And yet here was a facility equipped to inject energy into the sky, capable of reshaping the invisible architecture of the planet's atmosphere. In 2010, after a catastrophic earthquake struck Haiti, rumors swirled that HAARP had been testing directional pulses days earlier. No proof was ever released, just silence. As of now, HAARP still operates under civilian oversight, conducting occasional open houses for the public, but its systems or others like it may have been duplicated or advanced elsewhere, beyond public view. If weather itself can be influenced even slightly, then the strategic advantage is immeasurable, and the ethical boundaries obliterated. HAARP asks no questions, it simply emits, and somewhere the sky responds. Top 4 Project MK Ultra. We now turn to a dark chapter of psychological experimentation that was hidden for decades. In 1977, a cache of misfiled documents was discovered in a CIA storage room, and with it, the curtain was finally lifted on one of the most disturbing government programs ever conceived. Known as MK Ultra, the project's existence had long been whispered about in classified circles, but this was the first public proof. The files revealed a sprawling, decentralized effort to control and reprogram the human mind. Funded by the CIA and hidden behind front organizations, MK Ultra operated for over 2 decades under the guise of behavioral research. What it truly was psychological warfare against human consciousness. Launched officially in 1953 under CIA Director Allen Dulles, MK Ultra was designed to explore methods of mind control that could be used in interrogation, espionage, and manipulation. The paranoia of the Cold War era fueled the urgency of the project. Officials feared that communist nations were already developing similar techniques, and the U.S. could not afford to fall behind. What followed was a descent into moral darkness. Test subjects, many of them unknowing civilians, hospital patients, prisoners, and even military personnel, were exposed to a range of chemical, psychological, and physical manipulations. LSD was the compound of choice, administered in escalating doses without consent. In one documented case, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the program's chief chemist, ordered LSD to be slipped into the drinks of CIA colleagues during social gatherings to observe their reactions. In psychiatric hospitals, patients were kept in drug-induced comas for weeks, subjected to repetitive audio messages in psychic driving experiments. Others were exposed to electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, and sleep disruption. all while their brain patterns were meticulously recorded. Some participants never returned to a functional mental state. Others died under mysterious circumstances. Frank Olson, a biochemist involved in the program, allegedly committed suicide after being unknowingly dosed. Decades later, his family uncovered evidence suggesting he may have been murdered to prevent him from speaking out. His body was exhumed, and the autopsy revealed cranial injuries inconsistent with a fall, but no charges were ever filed. In 1973, amid growing scrutiny over government overreach, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra documents destroyed. Over 20,000 pages were incinerated. Only the few that had been misfiled by accident escaped. When the Senate held hearings in 1977, agency representatives admitted to some wrongdoing, but insisted the program had been terminated. However, many sub-projects, over 150 in total, had been outsourced to universities, pharmaceutical companies, and private contractors, often under vague grants or disguised as unrelated research. No centralized archive of MKUltra's full scope has ever been recovered. Even today, the legacy of MKUltra echoes in public policy and psychology. Several psychiatric techniques and drugs first tested under the project later became mainstream. Some of the scientists involved received awards or held high-ranking academic positions. Meanwhile, survivors of the program, those who remember it at all, continue to describe nightmares, memory fragmentation, and lives permanently altered. The true horror of MKUltra lies not just in what was done, but in what was lost. The destruction of its files ensured that countless victims remain unnamed, their stories erased, and their pain undocumented. If mind control on such a scale was once pursued and nearly achieved, what guarantees do we have that it ever truly stopped? The question is no longer whether the human mind can be manipulated. The question is, who decides what thoughts you are allowed to think? Top 5. Project A119. The Cold War also brought about plans that reached far beyond the Earth's atmosphere. In 1958, amid the escalating tensions of the Cold War, a secret committee convened under the directive of the United States Air Force. Their objective was not defense or deterrence, it was spectacle. The initiative, known internally as Project A119, aimed to detonate a nuclear bomb on the surface of the moon, not to destroy it, but to create a visible flash so bright it could be seen from Earth. The purpose was to prove American dominance in the space race by lighting up the heavens with a mushroom cloud. At the height of post-Sputnik panic, U.S. military leaders feared the Soviet Union was pulling ahead in space exploration. They needed a bold move, something that would shock the world and reassert American superiority. Project A119 was developed in complete secrecy at the Illinois-based Armor Research Foundation, with assistance from the Air Force Special Weapons Center in New Mexico. Among the project's young recruits was a then-unknown physicist, Carl Sagan. His job was to model how dust and light would scatter from a lunar nuclear detonation, information that would later appear subtly in his doctoral work, raising eyebrows years later when the project's existence was finally revealed. The weapon they intended to use was a W-25, a relatively small nuclear warhead with a yield of 1.7 kilotons. Engineers proposed launching it aboard a modified missile, directing it to impact the darkened edge of the moon so the explosion would be visible to observers back on Earth. There were no plans to inform the public before the detonation, no international consultation, just a silent launch and a sudden flash above the world's collective gaze. But as the project advanced, concerns began to surface. Scientists warned that a detonation could have unintended consequences, releasing radioactive debris into space or even damaging the moon's fragile surface. Politicians feared global backlash. The Outer Space Treaty, which would later ban the weaponization of celestial bodies, had not yet been signed, but public sentiment was shifting. In 1959, the project was quietly canceled. No press release was issued. The files were buried in classified archives for nearly 4 decades. It wasn't until 1999 that the truth emerged. Biographer K.A. Davidson, while researching Carl Sagan's early career, stumbled across indirect references to the lunar nuke plan. FOIA requests and declassified military records later confirmed the project's existence. Yet key details, including technical schematics, target coordinates, and internal communications, remain classified. The Pentagon has never acknowledged how close the plan came to execution. To this day, no one knows if a prototype warhead was ever constructed for the mission. No independent agency has confirmed whether a launch platform was tested. The possibility lingers that remnants of the project, or even contingency systems, might still exist dormant in the black budget vaults of military contractors. What makes Project A119 so disturbing is not just its ambition, but its motivation. It was not born from necessity, but from fear. A fear so profound that it led men to consider turning the moon, humanity's oldest symbol of wonder, into a theater of nuclear spectacle. If the plan had gone forward, the night sky would have been forever altered, and perhaps so too would humanity's view of power, science, and restraint. Top 6. The Silent Sound Program. On the modern battlefield, weapons have evolved to target the mind itself without a single shot being fired. In 1991, during the height of Operation Desert Storm, U.S. troops on the ground in Kuwait reported a strange phenomenon. Iraqi soldiers dug into fortified positions began surrendering en masse. Not under fire, not in chaos, but in eerie silence. Witnesses described dazed expressions and glassy eyes. Some dropped their weapons before the Americans even arrived. What compelled these troops to lay down arms without resistance? Buried beneath official reports was the mention of a classified psychological operation. Its alleged name was the Silent Sound Program, known within military research circles as Silent Sound Spread Spectrum, SSS. This technology was said to transmit subliminal messages directly into the human mind using ultra-low frequency audio signals below the threshold of conscious hearing. The concept was not new. Patent records show that in 1989, a U.S. defense contractor filed a design for a silent communication system in which non-oral carriers in the very low or very high audio frequency range are amplitude or frequency modulated with the desired intelligence. That intelligence could be anything: commands, emotions, even synthetic thoughts. According to leaked reports and scattered testimonies from defense insiders, the technology was field-tested during the Gulf War. Specialized aircraft allegedly broadcast these silent signals over enemy lines carrying coded messages like, "You are surrounded," "Your commander has abandoned you," or "Lay down your arms." The aim was to induce disorientation, fear, and compliance not through firepower, but by invading the battlefield of the mind. No official confirmation of SSS usage has ever been issued. The Department of Defense maintains that psychological warfare in the Gulf was limited to leaflet drops and loudspeaker messages. Yet multiple patents, including one filed in 1992 by inventor Dr. Oliver Lowry, describe systems that match the rumored operation in stunning detail. Lowry's design outlined how voice commands could be embedded in a silent signal and broadcast through television, radio, or airborne transmitters, affecting subjects without their awareness. In the years since, researchers have raised ethical alarms. Could such technology be used domestically? Could governments manipulate populations without them ever realizing it? In 1996, a congressional report briefly mentioned acoustic weapons in a list of non-lethal technologies, then quickly redacted the reference in future publications. Freedom of information requests regarding silent sound have been repeatedly denied or returned with pages fully redacted. Despite the denials, circumstantial evidence lingers. A classified Army document from 1993 titled Bioeffects of Selected Non-Lethal Weapons contains a section on silent audio with references to behavior modification. Meanwhile, some civilian reports from activists and whistleblowers allege that similar technology has been used in crowd control, political protests, and even in prisons. If the Silent Sound Program exists, it represents a weapon unlike any other, one that bypasses defenses, overrides judgment, and speaks not to the ears, but directly to the unconscious. There is no battlefield, no warning, only the echo of a voice that isn't yours, whispering thoughts you never chose. What happens to free will in a world where even your silence can be programmed? Top 7. The Dolphin Telepathy Program. The quest for silent communication even extended into the depths of the ocean with unlikely biological allies. In 1965, at a secluded research facility in the U.S. Virgin Islands, neuroscientist Dr. John C. Lilly conducted what he believed would redefine human communication. At the center of his work was an unlikely subject, a bottlenose dolphin named Peter, funded quietly by NASA and the U.S. Navy. The project aimed not to train dolphins, but to prove that interspecies communication through telepathy was possible. What began as a fringe experiment would later evolve into a series of classified studies under what insiders referred to as the Dolphin Telepathy Program. Lilly had long believed that dolphins possessed extraordinary intelligence, perhaps rivaling that of humans. His early work had already demonstrated their remarkable ability to mimic speech patterns and problem solve. But in his later, more controversial phase, Lilly pushed into uncharted waters. He theorized that dolphins might be able to share information not just through sound, but through electromagnetic biosignals, a form of natural sonar so refined that it could carry emotional and conceptual data, essentially thought transmission. To test this, Lilly designed an isolated habitat where humans and dolphins lived together for extended periods. The most infamous trial involved a young researcher named Margaret Howe living with Peter in a flooded apartment for several weeks. The experiment's public justification was language acquisition, but behind closed doors, the Navy was interested in something else entirely. Could dolphins be used for silent underwater communication, intelligence gathering, or even reconnaissance? Soon the project shifted to classified settings. Declassified Navy records from the early 1970s confirmed the existence of marine mammal training programs, but only referenced tasks like mine detection or object retrieval. What remains classified, however, are a series of operations involving non-vocal signal transmission between dolphins and human handlers. Internal memos from contractors hinted at spontaneous signal synchronization between species during field tests, a phrase many interpret as evidence of unexplained information transfer beyond physical cues. Further fueling the mystery were reports of dolphins responding to commands before they were issued or guiding divers toward objects they had not been trained to find. In one unreleased training exercise off the California coast, a Navy diver allegedly reported feeling a pulse of imagery seconds before a dolphin surfaced with a lost instrument. The incident was recorded, but the footage has never been made public. Despite mounting anomalies, the program was abruptly shut down in the early 1980s. The official reason was budget cuts, but insiders suggest the research had become too unpredictable and some worried about the ethical implications. Dr. Lilly himself became increasingly reclusive, eventually claiming that dolphins were not only telepathic, but possibly extraterrestrial in origin, an assertion that eroded his scientific credibility and pushed the entire field into obscurity. Today, naval dolphin units still exist, though under tight operational secrecy. Meanwhile, independent researchers continue to explore bioacoustic patterns in cetaceans, some discovering frequency modulations that defy current neurological models. And still, questions remain unanswered. If dolphins can perceive and project internal states, are they simply another intelligent species or a biological key to a larger hidden network of communication? The ocean holds many secrets. Some may be biological, others may be strategic. But if thoughts can travel between minds across species, languages, and silence, then what else has already been said beneath the waves? Top 8. Subdivision X of the Manhattan District. Even the most famous scientific project in history had a hidden division dealing with the inexplicable. In 1944, as the world's focus turned to the race for the atomic bomb, a lesser-known unit operated quietly in the background of the Manhattan Project. Officially listed only as a logistics and acquisition team, Subdivision X was tasked with securing rare minerals and exotic materials for nuclear research. But decades later, scattered references and declassified correspondence hinted that their mission had expanded to the collection of anomalous objects, ancient artifacts, and unidentified substances deemed outside known scientific classification. To this day, almost nothing is publicly known about Subdivision X, and yet its fingerprints seem to surface whenever history intersects with the impossible. Originally headquartered in a remote facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Subdivision X worked parallel to the Manhattan Engineering District, but with a vastly different scope. While one arm of the project focused on uranium refinement, this covert group operated globally, dispatching recovery teams to archaeological sites, wartime ruins, and reports of unexplained phenomena. A 1945 memo recovered through FOIA, heavily redacted, refers cryptically to non-fissile material, with self-luminescent properties recovered from an unnamed site in the Middle East. Another mentions resonant alloy objects found buried beneath permafrost in northern Siberia, artifacts that allegedly emitted low-frequency vibrations when exposed to magnetic fields. Some of these missions were facilitated under the guise of scientific surveys or cultural preservation. Yet multiple post-war testimonies from Army veterans describe transport crates with lead shielding, military escorts, and cargo manifests with indecipherable designations. One such witness, speaking anonymously in a 1982 interview, recalled guarding a shipment labeled simply X-27, which emitted a persistent low hum and was loaded into an unmarked railcar bound for Los Alamos. By 1947, as attention turned to nuclear diplomacy and Cold War politics, Subdivision X faded into administrative silence. Budget allocations were rerouted through private defense contractors, and its personnel were absorbed into what is now the Defense Intelligence Agency's Technical Services Division. All requests for records related to Manhattan Subdivision X have since been denied, with government agencies citing national security exemptions. Yet the trail does not end there. Independent researchers in the 1990s uncovered a series of internal procurement documents from the Atomic Energy Commission listing expenditures for non-terrestrial metallurgy analysis, vibrational field isolation units, and hypogeal containment structures. None of these terms correspond with standard scientific procedures of the time. Cross-referencing these documents with Subdivision X shipping logs revealed matching serial numbers, suggesting that the objects retrieved were stored and possibly studied long after the war ended. To this day, some believe Subdivision X was the foundation for what would later evolve into advanced aerospace black projects, or even the classified study of objects of unknown origin. If true, then the Manhattan Project was not merely the birthplace of the atomic age, but also the opening chapter in a quiet, relentless hunt for technologies beyond human comprehension. Some secrets are hidden, not to protect the public, but to protect the illusion that we understand the world we live in. Subdivision X may be the ledger of every anomaly we were never supposed to find and every question we were ordered not to ask. Top 9. The Soviet Woodpecker Signal. Across the ocean, the Soviet Union was broadcasting a signal that seemed to target the very biology of the planet. Beginning in 1976, shortwave radio operators across the globe began to report an intrusive, rhythmic clicking sound that overpowered normal frequencies. It was loud, repetitive, and impossible to trace. Dubbed the woodpecker signal due to its mechanical tapping pattern, the transmission pulsed at 10 Hz and was soon detected across North America, Europe, Asia, and even parts of the Arctic. For over a decade, this mysterious signal echoed across the airwaves, undeterred by weather, frequency shifts, or international concern. Its source was eventually traced to a facility near Chernobyl in what was then the Soviet Union. But the purpose behind this relentless broadcast has never been definitively explained and remains classified to this day. Officially, the Soviet government never acknowledged the signal. Western intelligence agencies, however, quickly launched investigations. What they found only deepened the mystery. The source was identified as Duga-3, an enormous over-the-horizon (OTH) radar installation hidden within the Ukrainian forest. At over 700 feet tall and stretching nearly half a mile, the structure was capable of bouncing signals off the ionosphere to detect incoming ballistic missiles from thousands of kilometers away. Or so the explanation went. But radio engineers and military analysts noticed something strange. The woodpecker pulses didn't follow normal radar modulation patterns. Instead, the signals seemed to interfere with electronics in unpredictable ways. Ham radio operators complained of headaches, dizziness, and disrupted cognition after prolonged exposure. In some countries, TV and radio signals were scrambled whenever the pulses intensified. There were even reports of aviation communication blackouts aligned with peak woodpecker activity. In 1982, a classified NATO report suggested that the Soviet Union might be experimenting with psychotronic warfare, the use of electromagnetic fields to influence human behavior and neurological function. The report cited the signal's frequency range, which closely aligned with known brainwave patterns, particularly the alpha and beta states associated with focus, anxiety, and sleep. Theorists warned that the woodpecker might be more than a radar system. It could be a large-scale field test of mass behavior modulation. Further suspicions arose from the facility's proximity to Chernobyl. After the nuclear disaster in 1986, Duga 3 was abruptly abandoned. Official statements claimed the radar system was obsolete, yet to this day the structure still stands, rusted but intact, fenced off by military patrols. Some believe the radiation from the Chernobyl meltdown rendered further experiments impossible. Others claim the site had fulfilled its purpose and was decommissioned to avoid global scrutiny. Curiously, when the woodpecker signals ceased in 1989, similar pulse patterns began appearing in isolated bursts from other parts of the world, including remote regions in Siberia, Greenland, and the South Pacific. No source was ever confirmed. FOIA requests to the NSA and Department of Defense regarding countermeasures taken during the woodpecker era have been denied or returned fully redacted. In one leaked document, an analyst described the signal as structured noise, too patterned to be natural, too erratic to be standard comms. To this day, no conclusive evidence has surfaced to prove the woodpecker was a mind control experiment. Yet no one has been able to fully debunk it either. It remains one of the few global phenomena to be both measurable and unexplainable, a ghost in the radio spectrum that may have been trying to speak directly to our biology. What if the battlefield of the Cold War was never just land, sea, or air, but consciousness itself? Top 10, the Black Budget Aircraft Initiative. Finally, we look at the silent giants that haunt our skies, funded by money that officially doesn't exist. On a quiet night in 1989 near Tonopah Test Range in Nevada, a truck driver pulled over to rest along a remote stretch of highway. As he stepped out, a shape drifted silently across the sky above him, massive, angular, and utterly soundless. It hovered momentarily, then accelerated and vanished into the desert night with impossible speed. He reported the sighting the next day. He wasn't the first. Over the next several years, pilots, engineers, and military personnel began whispering about aircraft that didn't exist on paper, flown from bases that officially didn't exist either. These were not alien spacecraft. They were man-made. They belonged to a program known only through its nickname, the Black Budget Aircraft Initiative. Unlike standard military development, which follows congressional oversight and public funding trails, black budget projects operate entirely in the shadows, hidden beneath layers of compartmentalization. Their existence is obscured by vague line items and redirected funding from conventional programs. These projects are often revealed only decades later, like the U-2 or SR-71, long after their usefulness has faded. But the Black Budget Aircraft Initiative appears to be something different, something ongoing. The rumors first gained traction in the late 1980s when witnesses in the American Southwest began reporting a new kind of triangular aircraft, often seen flying without lights, hovering silently or accelerating beyond the capabilities of any known jet. Aviation experts noted a wave of unusual contrail patterns, matched with radar anomalies and electromagnetic disturbances. In some cases, entire commercial aircraft lost navigation systems for minutes at a time when passing near certain flight corridors. Corridors adjacent to places like Groom Lake, Area 51, and the Dugway Proving Ground. Journalist Bill Sweetman, a respected aerospace researcher, cataloged dozens of credible reports of black triangles, theorizing the existence of an advanced reconnaissance platform called Aurora. Despite intense investigation, no official documentation of such a craft has ever been released. Yet in 1997, a line item buried in a Pentagon audit referenced a $4.7 billion expenditure labeled only as Advanced Aerospace Threat Reduction, with no project name or description. Further anomalies appeared in budget reports for the Air Force's Rapid Capabilities Office, an entity known to develop technologies that are decades ahead of current military fleets. Whistleblowers have occasionally surfaced. In 2006, a former defense contractor described a propulsion system that used controlled vacuum fields rather than combustion. Another ex-employee from Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works hinted that the U.S. had already built craft capable of non-ballistic motion, vehicles that don't follow the normal laws of inertia or aerodynamic drag. His statements were dismissed as fantasy, yet similar claims have been echoed by high-ranking officials in private interviews. More recently, the 2020 release of the U.S. Navy's unidentified aerial phenomena footage reignited interest in black budget technology. While the videos were framed as encounters with unknown objects, some researchers argued they were tests of domestic craft far more advanced than anything publicly acknowledged. The sudden controlled acceleration, lack of heat signature, and sharp maneuverability mirrored eyewitness descriptions of black triangles from decades earlier. What makes the Black Budget Aircraft Initiative so insidious is its perfect invisibility. It leaves no paper trail, no name, no formal announcement. It exists only in sightings, redacted line items, and the eyes of those who are told to forget what they saw. And yet its presence is felt in the shadows of technology that appears too soon, in radar tracks that defy explanation, and in the spaces between what governments admit and what they execute. Perhaps the real mystery is not what these craft are, but why they remain hidden. What kind of mission requires absolute silence, even from history? These 10 programs, scattered across continents, decades, and disciplines, may seem like isolated anomalies, but together they reveal a chilling architecture. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. It is a pattern of secrecy so entrenched and so meticulously guarded that the public only learns of it decades later, and only in fragments. From Camp Hero to the lunar warheads, from soundless weapons to mind control trials, each operation exposes a deliberate effort to rewrite what is possible without ever rewriting the history books. The mechanisms of concealment are as vast as the programs themselves. Documents vanish or are never created. Witnesses are discredited, relocated, or silenced. Scientific institutions become fronts. Defense contractors shield breakthroughs under proprietary technologies. Public explanations are offered in tones of dismissal or ridicule, a strategic inoculation against belief. The pattern is always the same: deny, delay, and when that fails, declassify just enough to suggest transparency while hiding the core. The cost is not just truth, the cost is trust. What lies beneath this pattern is not only a hunger for military dominance or psychological leverage, but the systematic removal of possibilities from the collective imagination. Technologies that could redefine energy, consciousness, or biology are locked away. Discoveries that might connect humans to deeper potentials are discarded, burned, or buried. Each document destroyed is a door sealed. Each voice erased is a question lost. We are told that these programs ended, that there was oversight, and that these were just Cold War excesses. But the machine of secrecy never stopped. Its shape only evolved. Today, its signals are subtler, buried in untraceable black budgets, private aerospace labs, and data centers where artificial intelligence sorts risk from revelation. What was once a file stamped top secret is now a classified algorithm, inaccessible by design. And so the greatest damage is not the events themselves, but the disruption of continuity. Each suppressed truth breaks the chain of understanding. What we might have become as a species, as a civilization, splinters into what we are allowed to become. Possibility becomes casualty. The most haunting question is no longer what is hidden, but why? Why would a machine of such scope go to such lengths to erase evidence of what might lift humanity forward? Because perhaps progress itself is a threat to power, and silence well maintained is the most efficient control system ever built. The question is not whether these projects exist. The question is why they are still considered too dangerous to reveal. If these stories have changed the way you look at the shadows of history and the secrets kept behind closed doors, please subscribe and like the channel. We are digging into the past that they have tried so hard to bury. Let us cultivate a future built on truth. The next vault of secrets will be opened very soon.